Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Florio and today we're going to dive into the crossroads of science and mystery. We're going to discuss how psychology plays a role in paranormal experiences. I'm going to explore how our minds can shape and sometimes even create the phenomena that we call paranormal. As well, I have a special guest, Benjamin Radford, who works within the paranormal and skeptic industries or areas. He applies critical thinking and skepticism to the world of the unknown. Ben has a degree in psychology among his other degrees. He's actually very smart. And today he's going to bring his knowledge of psychology into the paranormal for an interview at the end of this video. So whether you're a skeptic, a believer, or simply curious, stick around as we unravel the psychological threads behind ghostly sightings, eerie sensations, and inexplicable encounters. What are paranormal experiences? Before we dive deep into the psychology of everything, let's clarify what we mean by paranormal experiences. These are events or phenomena that seem to defy our current understanding of the natural world. Think of ghost sightings, psychics, mysterious lights in the sky, and even cryptids. While many of these experiences are reported worldwide, the explanations behind them are always hotly debated. Today, I'm going to focus on the role of our own minds in interpreting these events. Most often, psychology, which includes our brain's built-in shortcut biases and emotional responses, play a significant part in creating these mysterious experiences. So let's explore this topic together. Perception and the brain's shortcuts. Our brains are incredibly efficient at processing a massive amount of information every second. To make sense of this flood of data, we rely on mental shortcuts called heuristics. These shortcuts help us quickly interpret what we see and hear, but sometimes they can also lead us astray. And heuristics are mental shortcuts for solving problems in a quick way that deliver a result that is sufficient to use in a short period of time. Essentially, it's like quick shortcuts and quick answers that our brain processes very quickly. Let's review some examples of things that our brain and psyche do that directly affect how we perceive the paranormal. First example is pareidolia. This is a phenomenon where our brains recognize familiar patterns like faces or figures inside random or ambiguous stimuli. For instance, like have you ever looked at a cloud and seen shapes or noticed a face in a rock formation? That's pareidolia in action. In low light conditions or stressful situations, such as when exploring an old creaky house, our brains may also interpret ordinary shadows or noises as something far more sinister, like a ghost. A second example of these particular instances is also shadow people. In 2006, Science.com reported of a study by neurologist Olaf Blanke of the Brain Mind Institute in Switzerland. His research team ended up finding something by accident. They were attempting to find the source of epileptic seizures when one day they applied a mild current to the left TPJ of a woman's brain, and she began to see and sense a shadow person standing behind her. TPJ stands for temporoparietal junction. It's located roughly above the ear. So this team ended up discovering that the TPJ, when stimulated, creates an illusion of a shadow person. Given that such experiences are often heightened in psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia and paranoia, and even in those who believe they've been abducted by aliens or seen ghosts of some sort. The team believes that these results could actually lead to a better understanding of the neurological conditions behind all this, and may answer some questions for the paranormal community as well. Another example in the world of the paranormal is also confirmation bias. This is our tendency to favor information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs or expectations. If you enter a supposedly haunted location already expecting to experience something paranormal, your brain might subconsciously filter and reinterpret the cues as evidence of ghosts or spirits. In other words, our brains are primed to fill in the gaps based on what we expect to see. This isn't just about ghosts, it's a fundamental part of how we process the world around us. And when the environment is ambiguous, our minds often provide answers that fit our belief system, even if those answers aren't based on any sort of objective reality. So, these are just a few examples of explanations for what we experience as the unknown. But also, confirmation bias exists within our emotions and memory. So, let's discuss that a little bit more. Memory, emotion, and the shaping of experience. Let's talk about memory, one of the most complex and malleable functions of our brain. Memories are not static recordings of events, rather, they're reconstructed each time we recall them. This means they can be influenced by our emotions, suggestions from others, or even the environment in which we remember them. This is why we discussed how psychics can actually adjust your memories of your loved ones. Imagine you're in an old, dimly lit building and something unexpected happens, a creak, a shadow, or a strange sound. The emotional surge you experience in that moment can dramatically influence how you remember the event later. Over time, details can shift, and you might even recall the experience as something far more paranormal than it initially was. And this is when we get into misremembering things. And this is a common thing that happens with mentalist shows, magic, and psychics. This is where expectation and suggestibility come into play. If someone tells you that a location is haunted, your brain might later interpret the ambiguous stimuli, like the old creaks or gust of wind, as paranormal. The blending of emotion, memory, and expectation can create a really powerful, although subjective, experience of the paranormal. A psychic tells you what you want to hear, that your loved one is in a good place, is happy, and looking down on you. It triggers emotions that are very strong and can trick your mind into believing anything that psychic is telling you about your loved ones. In essence, our emotions and memories can work together to paint a picture of something supernatural, even when the actual event might have a more mundane explanation. Another aspect of psychology affecting paranormal experiences is social influence. So let's talk a little bit more about that. The impact of social and cultural influences. Our experiences of the paranormal don't happen in a vacuum. They are deeply embedded within our cultural and social contexts. Throughout history, every culture has its own folklore, myths, and legends about the supernatural. These narratives shape our expectations and interpretations of unusual events. Consider this, for example. If you grew up hearing stories about ghosts and spirits, you're more likely to interpret a mysterious noise or flickering light as evidence of the supernatural. The media, movies, books, and TV, they reinforce these images and ideas, further embedding them into our collective consciousness. Social contagion is another interesting aspect. When one person shares a paranormal experience, it can influence the other people in the group. Suddenly, a shared environment might lead everyone to report similar experiences. This isn't necessarily because something supernatural is happening, it's just the power of group dynamics and collective expectation at work. It's very similar to things like mass hysteria or mass hallucinations. Humans are social beings and we're highly influenced by those around us. And this is why a lot of haunting stories have so many witnesses. These social and cultural factors create a sort of feedback loop. The more we talk about and expose ourselves to paranormal narratives, the more likely we are to interpret ambiguous experiences as paranormal. It can be a fascinating interplay between individual psychology and the group culture around you as well. But it's something that we have to try to remember to keep an eye out for and not fall into. Let's talk about a few more specific phenomena. Unraveling paranormal phenomena. Now, if we apply a bit of what we've discussed to some specific paranormal phenomena, how might psychology explain events that seem to defy explanation? Let's take sleep paralysis, for example. This is a state where you wake up, but you find yourself unable to move. Oftentimes, also, you'll have hallucinations with it, usually of someone menacing in the room. A lot of times, too, like you'll feel something on your chest, like weighted down. I get sleep paralysis a lot. From a psychological standpoint, sleep paralysis is a very well documented condition that occurs when the brain is caught between sleep and wakefulness. The hallucinations are a result of the brain trying to make sense of the body that's temporarily immobilized, and often it causes fear and anxiety in that moment. But it is just your mind. Then there's also near death experiences. Many people report profound encounters, feelings of peace, or visions of bright lights during these events. Neurologically, these experiences can be attributed to changes in the brain function under extreme stress or oxygen deprivation. The brain facing a crisis may release a flood of chemicals that produce these intense otherworldly sensations, as well as feeling at ease and that everything's okay. And what about alien abductions? While these experiences are often framed as encounters with extraterrestrial beings, psychologists suggest that they could stem from a mix of sleep disorders, hallucinations, and the cultural imagery of aliens that are all over media. The brain is an expert at pattern recognition, and sometimes that means we connect dots in ways that fit the popular narrative, even when there's no actual, like aliens, for example, are involved in the situation. As well, many alien abduction stories began at a time when therapists started using hypnosis, and it was discovered that these false memories were being planted into people's minds during the hypnosis. Most of the time, therapists weren't meaning to even do it, it just kind of happened, but they know better now. In each case, our psychological makeup, our brain's need to find meaning, our susceptibility to external influences, and our reliance on memory and emotion, these all play a significant role in how we experience these events. So let's talk more about the science of it all. Interplay of science and subjective experience. At this point, you might be wondering, does acknowledging these psychological factors diminish the mystery of the experiences? Really, no, not necessarily. While science provides us with valuable tools to understand the phenomena, it doesn't strip away the wonder or personal significance that many people attach to their experiences. Instead, understanding the psychological mechanisms behind the paranormal experiences can empower us. It allows us to appreciate the incredible complexity of the human mind, its capacity to interpret, to feel, and to find meaning, even in the most ambiguous situations. Whether you see these experiences as windows into another realm or as fascinating quirks to the human mind, they remind us that our perceptions are deeply personal and profoundly influenced by who we are and where we come from. Okay, now we're going to get into the interview with Benjamin Radford. This was a really fun interview. Ben's extremely intelligent, and I'll just list off his About Me section on his website because I think it kind of covers a lot of who he is. Research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and folklorist member of the American Folklore Society and the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research. I thought that was really cool because I really like folklore stuff. As well, Ben's also an award-winning author, co-author, or editor of over 20 books and thousands of articles on a wide variety of topics, including urban legends, the paranormal, critical thinking, and media literacy. He has written a ton of books. As well, Ben is a co-founder and co-host of two podcasts, Monster Talk and Squaring the Strange. And a couple fun little things about him. He's also a board game creator and puzzle designer, as well as a film director. And he owns a collection of chupacabra shirts large enough to be cataloged. Anyway, this interview was a lot of fun. I'm going to play it for you guys now. Let me know if you enjoy it as well. If you want to have Ben back, if there's any other questions that you want to see covered. I love talking about psychology. It's quite fascinating to me. Also, just a quick note, I know I'm looking down a lot during this interview. My light was hurting my eyes. So I was watching it through my monitor and I didn't realize how bad it looks. So I do apologize.
I have a degree in psychology, and so it's interesting to sort of see how often that comes into play in my investigations. It much more than I would have expected, to be honest with you. But anyway.
Let's start off with introducing yourself.
Sure. Yeah. I'm a man of many hats, not at the moment, but in general. So yeah, my name is Benjamin Radford. I've written 13 books, last count.
Oh, wow.
I have degrees in psychology, education, and public health. I am a folklorist. I'm a writer. I'm also I'm also the managing editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine and have been for 20 some years. Long
Oh,
time.
wow.
I do
Okay.
investigations. I love mysteries. I love mysteries. I love solving mysteries. And so typically, oftentimes, everybody loves a mystery, right? People like Bigfoot and ghosts and monsters and psychics and crop circles and take your pick. And there's an inherent, of course, I mean, how can you not love a mystery? Like there's a 12-year-old inside all of us that are like, this is so cool. And I'm very much the
Yeah.
same way, except that I take it a step further. To me, mysteries are a dime a dozen. I mean, it's very easy to create a mystery. It's very simple. All you need to do is tell somebody half the story, or leave out important parts of the story, and magically you've created a mystery. So, although I love mysteries and most people do, they themselves aren't that, they're not that valuable. What's valuable to me is solutions, is explanations, it's solving the mystery, right? Because it's through that process that you learn about the world, you learn about human psychology, you learn about what isn't there, whether ghosts are there, things like that. So, and that actually sort of sometimes conflicts with my background in folklore. As I mentioned, I work in folklore. I'm a member of the American Folklore Society and the International
Oh,
Society for
are
Contemporary Legend
those
Research.
things? Oh,
There
that's
are
really
things.
interesting. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they're actually organizations where a bunch of nerds come together, usually once a year, and we talk about amazingly obscure things, and I love it. It's I'll go through the program, and there'll be some like there'll be someone giving a 20-minute talk on like German cookbooks and illustrations, 1820 to 1850. And you're like, who who would even think this is worth, so you're like, this is and then you go and watch, you're like, my God, this is really interesting, right? Because they're like, if you look at this cookbook published in Hamburg in 1821, has an illustration of this thing, and there was some questions whether it's actually, a mandrake root or is it something else. Anyway, and plus, a lot of my favorite folklores are Canadian. So the other thing I do is I have a podcast called Squaring the Strange, now in our sixth
Oh,
year, I
okay.
think it is. And we recently had on a Canadian folklorist friend of mine, Gail DeVos, talking about conspiracy theories about the arson
Oh, neat.
fires. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what
Okay.
I do.
That's really cool, actually. Yeah, because it would probably be interesting to connect with him at some point. Because I know I have some friends who want to do like some conspiracy episodes, like conspiracy theory episodes, and like do a little bit more with them because they're kind of fun.
Mhm.
But that's really interesting. I wonder if there's like a Canadian folklore society. I don't know if there's something like that.
That well, even though it's called the American Folklore Society, it is international. So it's we welcome our Canadian friends as a separate country. Let me be very clear. So yes, happy anytime.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah, that's really cool that you do all that stuff. It's so much fun. Like I love folklore stuff. I love like random obscure things and just like kind of getting. But I have like ADHD, and I think that helps with going down the rabbit hole of like the most obscure things sometimes.
Right. Well,
And
that's the
it's like I
thing,
have all
because
this obscure knowledge that.
yeah, you see something, and all of a sudden you're going down this, you're spending 3 hours researching this rando thing. You're like, wow, hopefully, of course, it's grounded in something real, right? And we could talk about that later. Is unfortunately, oftentimes due to algorithms and other reasons, when somebody starts going down a rabbit hole of conspiracy theories, for example, YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, the algorithms are more than happy to show you more of the same, and not bring in like,
Yeah.
hey, I know we just showed you this like crazy wild conspiracy theory, this total BS, but here's a skeptical perspective. Like, no, 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 no. Hey, here's more of the same BS, and that's one of the problems.
Yeah, it's true. It's like sometimes I like watching really crazy conspiracy theories on YouTube just because I love to laugh at them, like how ridiculous they are. Like what was one I watched the other day was the Antarctic, like aliens and then secret military bases in
Yep,
Antarctica. And I just
yep.
was like, it's always the guy with the crazy hair. You know that guy on the History Channel with the crazy he's on
Yep.
like all these episodes. And I just laugh at it, but you got to be careful because, yeah, the algorithm will start showing you that stuff. And it's like, oh, God. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. So essentially, I thought it would be cool to kind of talk to someone who has a degree in psychology about this stuff. Because a lot of times, like I'm doing a lot of debunking of like the Warrens and hauntings and
Right.
psychics and things, right? And
Right.
a lot of times people will be like, well, 50 people witnessed this haunting. And it's like, yeah, but mass hysteria is a thing. Like, and peer pressure and just like people wanting to have the limelight. Like there's
Sure.
reasons, there's psych reasons most of the time, right?
Yeah.
The humans have an interesting mind.
Yeah, and there's a couple things to point out about that. Number one is that oftentimes, because one of the things I do is I investigate ghosts. In fact, I wrote a book called "Investigating Ghosts" of of all
Oh,
things. Very,
cool. Okay,
very, very,
okay.
very straightforward book. In terms of the title, and so I've done ghost investigations for 20 years or something, and oftentimes what I find is that there are in my investigations there are sort of higher profile cases. Of course, a lot of them are one-offs, right? They are somebody's grandmother saw something weird in her basement last week. Oh, isn't this crazy? So there's sort of
Mhm.
mundane things that are local, regional. Then there are sort of haunted houses and people like that are sort of nearby. And then there's ones that make it on TV. But then there are other places that are sort of the famous cases. There's one example here in Albuquerque, where I live in New Mexico, of a haunted theater called the Chemo Theater. It's downtown. I was actually just past there a couple days ago. And I won't go into the whole story because it's kind of an involved one. I wrote about it in one of my books. But the story is that the theater itself is haunted by a young boy who died in that theater in the 1940s. And the idea is that the claim is that people who perform at the theater, because it's not just a movie theater, it's also a stage. So there's productions and plays and whatnot. And the idea is that if you don't leave something for the ghosts, for in this case, this one particular boy ghost, that he will ruin your performance. And in this case, it's donuts, because kids love donuts. I love donuts. I think everybody loves donuts to some extent.
Mhm.
Anyway, so the story is that many years ago, the cast and crew of this particular play, in fact, it was a Christmas Carol, the Dickens play, said, "This is ridiculous. I don't believe in ghosts. This is all silly. I'm not going to leave any donuts out for some imaginary figure." And it was like, "No, don't do that. Haven't you seen the horror films?" It's like, "No, take them all down." Anyway, allegedly, right after that happened, there were ruined performances. So you pissed off the ghost, and everything went wrong. Actors tripped
Mm.
over their lines. Lights exploded on stage. People forgot their lines. Everything that could go wrong in a live play went wrong, according to the ghost story. And in fact, it was allegedly witnessed by hundreds of people, right? Because this was a live performance
Right,
of
right.
in a prominent place. And so that was the story that I had heard growing up here in Albuquerque. Was, yeah, here's this famous case, this ghost, and again, this isn't just sort of 5 years ago someone saw something in their hallway. This is dozens of cast members and hundreds of people saw all this crazy stuff happening. Well, again, I'll spare you the whole story because you can read about it if you're interested. It's the Chemo Theater ghost case. But basically, I've been told over and over again, there's all these witnesses, they all said the same thing. And when I dug into it, there was one witness. One,
Oh, really?
not not hundreds, not dozens, not even a dozen, one guy who was there at the time. He was actually the technical director. Um, it all came from him. And so, and that was
Wow.
sort of eye opening in my investigations, because I realized that you can see these like, oh, all these eyewitnesses said this and dozens said this, and you're like, who are they? What are their names? What exactly did they see? And I
Mhm.
can tell you that in most cases, not every single case, but in most cases, I'm going to say 80 to 90% of the cases, when someone comes to me and says that there's all these witnesses saw the same thing, it's not true. it's simply not true. They're just repeating something that they saw on TV or they saw on some blog. And if you actually begin questioning people, like, what are their names? Who said this? Who interviewed them? It's all this, well, I don't know. It is said, that sort of thing. So I would just be careful. Just sort of skepticism 101 is, if someone tells you that dozens or hundreds of people saw the same thing, check that out for yourself.
Yeah, that's like when I was looking into the South End werewolf, that story from the Warrens, and they talk about all these crazy incidents that happened at the hospital, and nobody came forward. Like the only time that there was a witness was when he attacked a cop and almost killed him. And it's like, that's the only time there were witnesses. And it's like, well, I think all these other stories might be made up or over exaggerated or something. Cause like, if he went that crazy and was attacking like, like volunteers and patients, I'm like, he would have went to jail too. Like, yeah. So it's just like the stuff gets made up. But
Yeah, and I mean, and you talked a little bit earlier about about mass hysteria and contagion, and oftentimes,
mhm.
going back to psychology, there's this thing that's called Folie, and many people
Okay.
have heard of it these days because that was the subtitle of the latest that the Joker
The
movie, The
Joker?
Bomb. Yeah,
Oh, so that actually is a psych term. Okay.
it
I
is a
didn't know
psychology.
that.
Yeah, so that's a term
Okay.
that, yeah, it's been discussed in psychology for many many years. Uh,
Interesting.
the Joker film was not very good, as I'm sure you know. Anyway, but
No.
that's, yes, that's a reference to. In fact, if people are interested in seeing a cinematic, but cinematic and fiction, but very accurate depiction of Folie à, I recommend the William Friedkin film Bug, Bug, with
Okay.
Ashley Judd and Michael Shannon. Came out about, I think, 10, 12 years ago. It's a
I feel
small
like I may
film.
have watched that. I think I watched that. So what does foil do mean?
So Folie à, it's basically the folly of two. And it is
Oh,
when
okay.
somebody, yes, when it typically occurs in isolated groups. People, campers, for example, people in schools, people who are, they have to be in a particular place. They're lost. They're shut-ins. They're a married couple, whatever else. And they typically, it's again, literally means the folly of two, although it can be more than two, but two is sort of the classic two or three. And we often see this. One of the things I investigate is mass hysterias, or what's called massogenic illness. And I've researched and written
Okay.
about that. Yeah, pretty extensively. That was part of the explanation for the. Do you remember the 1997 Pokemon panic, where
I
all those
remember
people?
Pokemon was like a big deal, but
Well, there was
what's
seizures. There was allegedly a bunch of children that had
oh,
seizures in
I think
1997.
I remember about, yeah, I think I vaguely, I hated Pokemon. So I'm like, I think I heard of it, but I didn't really
Yeah,
like look into it or
yeah. I
so I
wasn't a
didn't
big
care.
Pokemon fan myself,
Mm,
but I researched that case because it was interesting and I had some background in it. Anyway, the where I'm going with this is that massogenic illness, or MSI, mass hysteria. It played a role in that case. In fact, it very likely played a role in Havana syndrome. The claims about the sonic weapons that are attacking the U.S. embassies
oh
in
yeah,
in
I have heard of
anyways.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's going on. Anyway, so basically the basic thing happened. What happens is that typically one person will think that something is wrong. And it'll be something that's subtle. So it's not like suddenly the lights go out or something crashes through the wall. It's they'll smell something, or they'll feel
Mm,
something, or they'll suddenly feel hot, or they'll feel itchy. There'll be something that's not. They'll get a headache, or they'll sort of start feeling nauseous, or there'll be some sort of relatively minor malady or symptom that they start feeling. And what often happens, not every single time, but but what often happens is that somebody else they'll someone who's nearby will see that, because your aunt, it may be a coworker, it could be a spouse, whatever else, boyfriend, girlfriend. And if you're in an enclosed space, again, a factory, an office, a home, something like that, they'll say, don't you smell that? Some say, yeah, I think I do smell something. I don't. I'm not sure what it is, but I think I smell
mm.
something too. and they'll play off each other. And this is not a hoax. It's not a lie. It's not a gag. It's not a prank. They are both sincere, and it's important to realize that. So when we're talking about Folie, Deux, we're talking about MSI, mass hysteria. It's not, no one's going crazy. It's not a mental illness. It's not a hoax.
No, yeah.
It's very
It's
real.
like, I see it as like sort of like peer pressure, but like subconsciously, like not overtly, you don't realize you're falling for it.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Yeah.
probably the most accessible example to lay people is yawning. Yawning is contagious.
Oh, that's a good example. I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
And that's, again, that's what that is one person starts yawning, and then someone else starts yawning,
Got it. So I'm gonna
and
start yawning.
you're gonna start yawning too, right? And that's
Even just
that's what I'm
saying it can, like, yeah, it's
yeah.
so weird that
And
happens. Oh, that's
yeah,
so
and
true. Yeah.
and again, it's not, I mean, so it's a case of where you see someone reacting. It's basically a sympathetic response, and it's unconscious, right? You see someone yawning, and you don't think, wow, they're yawning, I should yawn too. You just sort of, they see, like, yeah, it's a little tired, and so, and this happened, and now you're trying not to yawn right now. So
Yeah.
yeah, so this is a sort of very obvious common example, but again, it can be much more subtle, and oftentimes it does occur in small social groups. And again, it's a case of where the symptoms are pretty mild. Again, it's a headache. It's feeling itchy. It's feeling just not quite right, or feeling fatigued, or things like that. So it's not like someone, if someone nearby breaks their arm, you're not going to suddenly break your arm. So these are relatively mild um, uh, symptoms that are spread through social contagion.
That's interesting. Yeah, because like also from my experience from like researching into cases and things, right? Is also if you're in a community that's like highly religious
Hmm.
or like something that brings you all together, right? Like for instance, Enfield
Hmm.
poltergeist.
Right.
There's all these witnesses that came forward, but I'm like, listen, like they were a community of of a certain social standing, which at that time there's a great disparity between the poor and the wealthy, and it was really bad, right? So they were
Sure.
kind of insulated because it was a like community housing area, and people wanted to believe that it was a ghost, and people were really interested. This was around the time where supernatural was kind of taking off in media, and so people
Hmm.
like wanted to believe. So when they saw Janet jumping on her bed when they were outside looking at her window, they thought that she was levitating, and they decided that that's what it was because they wanted to believe. And then just the word spread, and suddenly it was like all these people witnessed it, but it's like, no, only the one neighbor saw it through the window, and this person like didn't actually witness this. Like,
Right.
it's the little things, right? And then it just kind of spread from there, and people talk about how many witnesses there are, and I'm like, yeah, but they like, there wasn't that many, and they were also things that you can kind of refute. Like it's like they wanted to believe.
Yeah, I mean, another example, if you or anybody else wants to do a little more digging into this, another example is the Indian rope trick. There was a book by Peter Lamont, who's a magician and I think psychologist, and he's worked with Richard Wiseman. Anyway, he came out with a book titled "The Indian Rope Trick." I think it's maybe 8, 10 years ago, and it's really fascinating because it's an example of how, I don't know if you don't know, the Indian rope trick is basically where allegedly it's a magic trick, and the idea is
Okay.
that a person originated in India with the fakirs, and there would be someone who would be a man, and he'd have a basket, and he'd play the flute, and he would take the top off of the of a basket, and the either a rope or a
Oh, it would
snake
come out like a snake kind of
would
deal,
come out of the
right?
snake, but then it would go up and then stiffen like a rope.
Right. I've seen that. Yeah.
And then he would have an assistant, usually a young boy, climb up the rope and then vanish, disappear
Oh, I never seen that one. Okay.
in
Okay.
the air, right? And this
Yeah.
would be done like not on a stage, like out in the open, like in a field, right?
Really?
And and
Oh,
so, from a physics point of view, like that can't happen. That literally
no.
you that is not a thing that can haan. Like there's no if there's like low clouds, I
Gravity
mean,
and yeah.
yeah, it's not a thing, right? And yet,
Mhm.
and yet, as Lamont talks about in that book, there are allegedly dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of people who swear, say, I saw this. I would now, granted, these are cases from like 150 years ago, like these are 80 years, a
Mhm.
long time ago. These aren't modern cases, but the point here is that the believers in this would say it may not be real today, but it was real at some point because we have all these people who said they saw it, and like, well,
Yeah.
yes and no, because and when and in again, I don't want to go too far into it, but the book is really interesting if you like that if you're looking at the psychological aspects to it, because again, it's something that people literally could not have seen, and when you start digging into it, you realize they didn't see that. A
Yeah.
couple of people saw some counts of some magic trick in the same way that you might go to an actual magic show and say, wow, that mentalist, that was amazing. I kind of think he was psychic. Like, okay, well, just because you were fooled by it doesn't mean it's a thing. So, yeah.
It's sort of under mass hysteria, but what was the other term that you said that this was also applying to?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, there's mass
Mhm.
associative illness, MSI, which is sort of a different.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
MSI.
also
Okay.
called conversion disorder because you're
Okay.
converting symptoms, right? And so, yeah, and again,
That
there's
happens like in a lot of illnesses kind of situations.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
a colleague of mine, Bob Bartholomew, I've written a couple books with him. He's a sociologist in New Zealand, and he's written extensively on this, including in the book Havana Syndrome, which I mentioned earlier. And
Mhm.
he is a world expert on this, and he and I have both written on this. And so and one of the things about mass sociogenic illness and mass hysteria is that it happens much more often than people realize.
It
It
does,
is
yeah.
it is very common, and people don't think about it because
Especially around kids. Kids do it a lot.
kids,
Yeah.
yeah, and you mentioned earlier about the Enfield case. In
Mhm.
many, as I said before, it can happen anywhere, but typically it's closed social groups. So uh, young kids, schools, uh, uh,
Churches.
churches,
Yeah.
exactly,
The ones like
institutions,
Salem, like
right?
super religious, insulated
Yeah.
community. Yeah.
Right. In fact, in factory workers, there's many cases in, for example,
Oh, I
Vietnam
could
and
see that.
Bangladesh and Indonesia,
Mhm.
where there'll be, and it's not always, but it's often spread by women. And that's not a
Oh,
sexist statement;
okay.
it's just true. And the reason for that, as you may know, is that in many cases, particularly in other cultures, women tend to be more social. Men are sort of
Right.
like
Yeah.
they're more solitary, they do the thing, and because
Mhm.
the contagion is socially spread, right? It's there Women tend to be more empathic. So if
Yeah.
somebody in the next
Women
office
tend to
over,
gossip more too.
right, so yeah, so they're more spreading, and it's easier to get circulated around. So that's one of the sort of other aspects to it.
Interesting. Okay. Um, I know I have a list here, so I'll try to keep it quick. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up all your time, but I have a good list here. So something else that I talked about in my a few of my psychic videos, I've mentioned it, and like
Hmm.
people in my comments have mentioned it, is about like neurodivergent people, and like they could be hyper observant, and
Sure.
they could like think they're psychic or be able to pull off faking being psychic because of their brains, the neurodivergent thing. What do you think about that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. Oftentimes people can either come off as psychic, or in some cases, they can come to believe that they're psychic through
Mhm.
psychology. And so, for example, um, there are ways in which the human brain gathers information without us consciously knowing that we're doing that.
Yeah.
To some people that may sort of like ESP, but it's not. It's normal cognition, right? So let's say, for example, you walk into a party, a crowded room, and there's 15 people in the room, and out of the corner of your eye, you see an ex-boyfriend or ex-girlfriend, and you didn't know they were going to be there. You didn't lock eyes on them, but you sort of you're familiar with them, you recognize them, but you don't think about it because again, you're just in there, you're saying hello, and put your stuff and beer, things like that. And so there's ways in which we pick up cues, external cues from our surroundings, and we don't always remember that we're not conscious of it because there's no reason to be, right? If you walk into a store where you don't normally go, you're looking around. If it's your ordinary store, if it's Loblaws or something, then you know where the milk is. You know where the maple syrup candy is, which I love, by the way. But if it's a new place, you're not familiar with surrounding, and you're taking it all in. And so the point here is that it's often the case where even non-neurodivergent people, again, we gather information from around us, and we can know something without really knowing how we know it, and that can seem very mysterious. And I think, particularly in the case of neurodivergent people, is that there's an aspect to it, and it's sort of similar to how psychotherapists and psychics will do it, and it's listening. It's listening. And so it's sort of a cliche, the lost art of listening, because everyone's so busy. There's people doing more talking than listening, and that's often true. But if part of what you do or part of your neural makeup is listening, right? If you're a psychologist, if you're a therapist, you're being paid to listen. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's what you're being paid to do, is for 52 minutes, whatever it is, you're focusing on this client, you're listening to what they have to say, you're analyzing, you're giving them the best advice and things like that. Same thing with a psychic, right? You go to a psychic and you say, hey, tell me my fortune and read the cards, whatever else, and they're listening to you. And it can be very powerful, like, someone's listening to me. Well, yeah, you're paying them, but yeah. But the point here is that can be very powerful, and it can be powerful for both the sitter and the client. And of course, that's also how psychics can engage in hot reading, in cold reading, is listening. And I mean, I've been at places where psychics and alleged psychics have given readings to people out in public, in some cases in venues. And it's fascinating because I will hear the psychic repeat back to what the person like just said, or said just a minute or two earlier. I'd be like, how did you know that? I'm like, you said that. I heard you. We all heard you say that. This is not psychic, or it could be very easily inferred, right? So someone's like, and it just happens over and over again. And for a more skeptical person with a background in psychology, such as me, it jumps out. It's like, I, that's it pops out. But to a lot of people, they're in the moment, they're engaged, they're sort of in the center. They're holding a microphone, talking to a psychic, alleged psychic. The focus is on them. They're kind of nervous, they're kind of excited. They're not listening to the exact words they're putting out there. They're just sort of responding in the moment. And again, oftentimes what the psychic says back to them is either exactly or pretty close to what they already told them, but it's interpreted as amazing new fresh information. And I think that's part of what's going on here. Is people will pick up on things that other people. It's not that they can't listen to it; they're busy. They're doing other things. They're not focusing on it. But then when you have somebody who actually is paying close attention, that can seem to some people like psychic ability.
Yeah, like I just released a video. I can send you the link because I grew up my mom was psychic and she raised me to be psychic. And I grew up
Okay.
like thinking I was psychic. I'm neurodivergent. And I grew up thinking I was psychic and like I totally believed it, but just over time I got kind of like I don't know, it's like a realization that I think I'm just being highly observant. Plus, I'm an empath, but I have ADHD, so I like try to really listen to people because I'm trying
Hmm.
not to let the ADHD take over the conversation. So I've also trained myself to shut up and listen, and that was that's part of it too,
Interesting.
right?
All
So
right.
yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
So it's kind of interesting, yeah, because I talk about a bunch of my video and just sort of like how we convince ourselves that we're psychic, but all I'm doing is predicting things. Like I take in a lot of information. Like I can predict elections because I worked in politics for 25 years. I can predict like world events because I pay attention too much to the news. And it's just I'm taking in a lot of information, right? And it's like I'm not
Hmm.
predicting the future. I'm just choosing a logical solution or a logical thing that's going to come out of something, right? Because also I recognize patterns. And that's
Right.
why I can predict elections and most of the time predict like most government stuff going on because I worked in it for like 25 years and we have a pattern. Humans have a pattern when it comes to politics.
Sure.
Sometimes we do something crazy, but mostly, mostly we stick with the pattern, right? So,
Well, yeah, and
so yeah,
I think that's especially true, and I love that backstory. That's it all sort of fits together. Yeah, I think that's especially true when you have a population of Americans or Canadians or anybody else who doesn't
Mhm.
in fact follow the news, who doesn't in fact. I mean, they get their news from TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, and because it's such an information bubble, they're getting news that confirms their biases and assumptions. Whereas somebody
Yeah.
like you, who is going beyond that, it's like you're not always right. I'm not. No one's always right. But
Mhm.
if on the whole you're taking some steps to get a broader array of information, whether it's from CBC, CNN, New York Times, whatever it doesn't mean that it's magical, everything's going to be right, but it means that you're going outside your bubble and trying to establish what the patterns are. And so to people
Mhm.
who to people who don't think that way, and they get they don't really get news, and to the extent they do get news, it's from the Daily Show or
Yeah,
or
social media
Instagram.
news is so bad now. It's like that's where everyone's getting their news, and I'm like, it's so bad,
Yeah,
guys. Like, don't.
that's not it. I have to tell people, like,
Yeah,
also, like, where'd you see that? Like, oh, and I'll ask them,
on
what's your news
Facebook
source?
or yeah,
Yeah, my news source is Facebook. Like, okay,
it's the worst one of
um,
all.
um,
Well,
that's
TikTok,
not a news
Facebook.
source. Like, I are you 10? I don't. I thought this was clear. It's like so. I,
Hmm. And that's something that Sylvia Brown used to do. When I dug into her, I figured out she was reading medical journals, and this was in the 90s. So, like, they were hard to find. Like, you had to order them, right? So,
mhm.
she was getting them mailed to her, reading medical journals. She was getting all these different journals and all these different, like, world things, like, mailed to her. She was reading stuff that normal people wouldn't read. So, she would make a prediction that, like, a new vaccine was coming out and it would come out the next year. And it's like, well, it takes like 10 years of testing before something comes out. She was just reading medical journals that because the internet wasn't a thing
Interesting.
yet.
How
So
did you
like I
dig that up?
figured that out. She admitted it on the Montel show, and then I just did the math of what year it was when the internet was popular. And I'm like, guys, that's why she I went
Interesting.
back and
Interesting.
looked into a vaccine that she predicted, and I was like, oh, she's reading that's what she did. She was reading medical journals. I'm like, that's so funny because then that made me realize I'm like, I do stuff like that. I read journals and I'm like, I wonder because like I was doing subconsciously, like not realizing like Sylvia knew what she was doing, right? But there's like my mom totally believes she's psychic. I totally believed I was psychic because there's believers, like you
Sure.
believe you are. And it's just over time I've just come to realize I'm like, no, I was just like I'm just really good at seeing patterns or I have information in my head that's like, I don't know, random stuff. And it's like, yeah, I think there's explanations for like all these things, right? So
But here's the thing, though, is that most people in your situation, I would guess, they that would feel threatening to them because, as you know, I mean, if you truly believe you're psychic, and I've met many people who I'm certain. I mean, I dated a woman who was absolutely convinced she was psychic. I don't believe that for a second. I don't doubt that for a second. You if
mhm,
you if you truly believe that you're psychic, you have these abilities, it makes you special. It means that
Yeah.
you have information
Mhm.
and knowledge and wisdom that ordinary people don't have, and they come to you telling you you're amazing and giving you money and thank yous and kudos and stuff. And it's got to be, because it's such a part of their self identity. It's got to be very, very challenging to accept. It's like, hold on, I don't. Maybe I'm not. So I have nothing but respect for that.
Yeah, like I kind of broke out of it because I love history. Like, and so when I started this YouTube channel back up, I pivoted into paranormal. And at first I was just kind of like make videos on the history of like a story or something, right? And then I started looking into the story and I'm like, "Oh, this isn't true." And I started finding like real like reasons for stuff. And that
Right.
sort of led me down a path where it was like already I stopped believing in ghosts because I had some friends die when I was ghost hunting with, and she never came to visit or gave a sign. And I was like, oh, I don't think that this stuff is true. Right. And then just kind of over time, and I'm like, I still play with tarot cards and I still like talk about astrology. I still like the stuff, but I don't take it seriously. You
Sure.
know, it's just kind of something fun to do. Right. But yeah, and it's just over time, I just come to realize that I'm like, because neurodivergence kind of a new thing, right? And it's like when I
Certainly the
was
label
younger,
is.
yeah, the label is and understanding it. And I'm like, when I was younger, that wasn't known. So I didn't realize, but now I do after like hearing about hyper observant people. And now, like, I found out I have ADHD. Well, I always kind of knew, but I got diagnosed and I'm like neurodivergent. I'm like, I think that I'm just a person who picks up on things. I'm like, I don't think I'm psychic because,
Hmm.
like, I can just and I can feel people's energy around me, but that's just because I can feel like I think it's an empath thing. Like we just feel when people are angry, like you just feel it, like it can weigh you down being around
Yeah.
those people, you know. I'm like, I think that's just a human thing. I think that's something. Honestly, I'm fascinated with physics, and I could go on about that, but I do think that's something in to do with physics, our
Hmm.
energy fields and stuff. I don't think it's like spiritual or anything. I think it's just the way our body's made. But that stuff I find fascinating, and then I kind of have gone down rabbit holes with that. So, but all right, next thing on the list, because I know I could talk about all this stuff forever. I have on the list confirmation bias, or people who refuse to think critically or get angry when someone tries to change their view. There's like a psych aspect to that, right? Like someone believes in something wholeheartedly and you try to tell them the truth and they get angry because they don't want to change their view because it's too hard for their brain to process.
Yeah, I mean, so it is confirmation bias, and it is very, very common. It's probably one of the most common and one of the most significant and powerful cognitive biases. Of course, there are dozens and dozens of them, but it's sort of one of the foundational ones. And basically, as you said, it's where people will seek out information that confirms their assumptions and beliefs, and they will discredit or ignore, in some cases, information that doesn't. So, and we see this in politics all the time. That's sort of one of the most common examples, but there's many others as
That's true.
well.
Mhm.
Religion is a common one
Yeah.
where you know
Yeah.
it's if your worldview is that Jesus Christ died on the cross for your sins, and everybody's a sin unless they're saved, then that is the prism through which you see the world, and everything is through that prism. So obviously anybody who believes otherwise, the atheists, the Jews, the Muslims, they're just deluded because they are not in that framework, and of course vice versa.
Right.
um but yes, and that's one of the, and there's been really fascinating research done on this, where there's a really good book called "Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me," by Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson, I think it was. Excellent book
Okay.
if anybody's looking for a topic on that. And yeah, so that in there, and there's another book called "How We Know It Isn't So" by Tom Gilovich, and there's lots and lots. I could go on and on, but if you're looking for sort of a very accessible look at how psychology plays a role in these sorts of things, those are good ones. And again, it happens all the time. So another example outside of politics and religion would be, if you start a new job, you go to a new organization for whatever reason, and you're there for a couple days, you're just sort of getting the lay of the land, and here's your office, here's where everything is. And during a lunch break, someone says, "Hey, good to meet you. Where are you from? Blah blah blah." So watch out for Brenda. she's in accounting. She's a bitch. It's like I have nothing but trouble with her. Brenda, just like everything, she screws everything up, and you're not going to like her, but whatever. Hey, have a good day. Well, the next time you encounter Brenda, whether it's the next day or the next week, you're because of anchoring bias and confirmation bias, you're primed, psychologically primed to assume that she's going to be difficult and incompetent, and she may make the same number of mistakes that you or anybody else would make, but you're going to attribute those mistakes to the fact, well, of course, everybody knows Brenda's incompetent. She's a bitch. She's difficult to work with. Whereas in fact, she might be just as easy to work with and make just as many mistakes as anybody else, but you've been set through confirmation bias.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good example because it does happen. Yeah, especially like in high school and stuff that would happen, like rumors about somebody, and then it just makes the whole school turn against them. So
Right.
yeah, that's definitely a thing. So because we do run into that a lot, obviously, as like debunkers and stuff, we get people that are just angry, and it's like, but you can't convince them. Like they need to be ready to like hear it because their mind can't handle the
Yeah, and
change
it's
in thought process.
yeah, and I mentioned a related bias a second ago called anchoring bias, and that's where we tend to make judgments based on the first example, the first impressions. So, for example,
Mm.
just to use a totally different example, let's say that you go to a store and peaches are on sale, and they're super cheap price. And you're like, okay, well, peaches should be, $2 for 10 pounds. And then you go to another store and they have peaches for a slightly higher price. So you're gonna think, well, this is ridiculous. Well, I mean, I could, because once you saw that, you're like, this is how much these things should be. Well, of course, the first price you might have saw might have been artificially low. It could have been a sale. It could have been bad peaches. I don't know. But and this is why, for example, if you go to a store and it says, normal price is $40, now it's 32. We're like, wow, that's I'm saving $8. Well, that's because you're anchored at $40. You bring it down. Whereas if it said, normal price is $33, it's now 32. Like, I'm only saving $1. So those are other examples of anchoring bias.
Now what do you think? I do find it interesting. I feel like people don't think critically, like the mass of people. It feels like only a small percentage in total, like actually think critically, like go through their life and think critically about things that they're being told. Is that something that's like, is that new, or is that like an issue with the education system, or is it just human nature that we tend to not think critically about everything that we're being told?
Well, yeah, there's a couple answers to that. It's true that most people don't think critically about the world, but it's also true that there's no reason to expect that they would. It's like saying, well, why doesn't everybody play the violin? Why doesn't everybody, you know, why isn't everybody doing something that people are trained to do? Why isn't anybody a trained athlete? Um, because you have to train people. Critical thinking it's a learned process. It is a talent. It is a skill. You have to learn it. It's not intuitive to people.
Hmm.
And because of that, you have to learn the principles of critical thinking. You have to either in school or through coursework or a book. I mean, there's lots of resources for critical thinking, but one of the keys here is to recognize that it's valuable. And unfortunately, critical thinking in general is not taught in schools, right? Not taught in American schools.
Mm.
I was very fortunate when I grew up in elementary and high school to be in what was called the gifted program, and so I
Oh,
was
okay.
I was put in different classes, and in those classes I was taught critical thinking. I was like, they're like, go to this class. One of them was called multi-level, whereas in that class I was actually interacting and in the classroom with people who were somewhat older than me, in some cases. I wasn't just with my peers. I was with people who had different experiences. They were in many cases they were smarter than I was, which was great because I loved interacting with people who were smarter than I was. And so again, I'm fortunate in that in the school system that we have here. And let me be clear: the New Mexico school system is not known for being that great. I mean, this is New Mexico, where the state that I live in is on the lower end of many scales, child mortality, poverty, and so all sorts of things. But I was fortunate in that I was tracked as a young teenager into more critical thinking. But I also recognize that that is not the case for most people. And I'm a strong believer. Again, goes back to my master's degree in education, that critical thinking should be a required course in all schools, because it is the prism through which we understand the world. That's how we understand geography. That's how we understand biology. That's how we understand everything. And unfortunately, oftentimes, critical thinking is sort of seen as this sort of like, well, it's important, but they'll figure it out, or if we just teach them the other stuff, that it'll somehow just manifest itself. And critical thinking needs to stop being thought of as something that's extra, and start being thought of as something that is fundamental. It is the basis upon which people think accurately. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean that critical thinkers are always right, of course, but on the whole, it does mean that the decisions and the outcomes will be higher. So that's what I would say about critical thinking. So I think that, I mean, look, our human brains, and we know it's through evolutionary psychology, right? We are descended from people who were afraid of the darkness, around campfires, right? There's some terrifying roar in the wilderness, and our brains are sort of, primeval brains, think that there's monsters out there. So that's what I would say is that people in general don't think critically, and to be very clear, it's not because they're stupid. It's not because they're dumb.
I think that we're just not taught, because I remember I went to college for computers. And when I got there, I was like, why didn't they teach us logic and critical thinking in high school? Because it would really help. Like, I learned it in college, and I was like, this is really helpful. Why did it take until college before I learned this? Right. And it's like, wow, they don't have it. And this is Canada high school, and I know they don't have it in the US either. Yeah. And it's like, I find it so strange that they don't teach it to kids, because not everyone goes to college. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, absolutely. So again, it's and part of it is that, in our everyday lives, we don't need to think critically. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, where I am. Not if you're in other parts of the world, it's I'm trying to think. No, actually, I guess it's true everywhere. But the fact is, but think about that, right? It's like our experience is that the sun rises. That's what we see. That's not it's not a mistake. That is how it appears. You live, in your house or apartment. The sun comes up and the sun goes down. But of course, in reality, the sun doesn't go anywhere. The sun is stationary.
We're moving.
But and I like to use that example because in our everyday lives, and to people hundreds and thousands of years ago, it's not wrong or stupid or not good critical thinking to think the sun rises, because it does, according to our perspective. But through critical thinking in science, we can understand the broader perspective and sort of see it in context.
That actually, and you talked about around the campfire, that brings me to my next question as well, about the primal brain. When it comes to ghosts and things, people see shadow people, or they see shadows at night, the fight or flight, and they see shadow people in the corner of their eyes. And is that all part of like our primal instincts?
Yeah, part of it. It's I wrote a book called I've forgotten the title, but it's a good book. America the Fearful. It came out about a year or two ago, and in that book I talk a lot about the role of fear in public discourse, in politics, in narratives and boogeymen, things like that. And it was really interesting to sort of look at what a motivation fear is, particularly in politics, advertising, and so on. And I think, part of what's going on is that because people are afraid of certain things, people are afraid of dying in car accidents, they're afraid of scary people, boogeymen, immigrants. Take your pick.
Mhm.
Depending on the
Even
context,
just like scared of dying, like that's a big
yes,
reason
scared,
people
whatever
believe in
else, right?
ghosts too. Yeah,
Right,
and
and so
psychics. Yeah.
and again, that's understandable, right? Because we want to live happy, healthy lives for ourselves and our families and so on. But it also makes us very amenable to psychological pressures and manipulation, particularly in the political realm when you're talking about fear and things like that. So uh, when you're talking about some of these experiences, particularly like for example, ghosts, right? Is there's this element of legend tripping in it, where uh, where the fear it is both palpable and sort of artificial in that um if and I've it's like one of my favorite examples. So let me just ask you this. So have you looked for Bloody Mary?
Yeah, when I was a kid, yeah.
Okay, so for those who don't know, so well, you tell us. So tell us about Bloody Mary.
Well, you could look at a mirror in the dark and say her name 3 times, and then she's supposed to show up in the mirror and do something.
And do what though? According to what you heard,
Something
what
scary. I mean, that's what I asked my friends too. Like, well, what is she supposed to do? Like, I don't know, something scary. I'm like, okay.
okay, so this is where folklore comes in, right? So I researched the Bloody
Hmm.
Mary legend. And you're right. So do what is the question, right? So some people think the
Yeah.
Bloody Mary appears and she reaches out and kills you out of the mirror. Some people believe that Bloody Mary she shows you what you look like when you're older. Other people believe that, I mean, all sorts of different things. But here's the thing. So I've asked because Bloody Mary as you know, it's primarily a girl's ritual,
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
I've
it's like
asked
a
like, well,
sleepover thing. Yeah.
yeah, sleepovers. I'm like, well, hold on a second. If you really believed that you were going to summon an evil demon or witch that would appear in a mirror and kill you, why would you do it? Like, if you seriously thought this was going to happen, and they're like, well, see, so it's play acting, it's legend tripping, it's fun. I'm not making fun of it, but you have to
Hmm.
recognize that actual fear, fear of sharks, fear of fear. These are different than these legend tripping fears that we see, particularly in
Hmm.
ghost sites. So yeah,
I see like ghost stuff a lot of times. Like, I mean, I've had experiences. I am a skeptical believer. I still do believe in stuff, right?
sure.
But I'm like reasonable with things. But I think like a lot of times when it comes to ghosts and the paranormal, it's kind of like roller coaster riders. That's what it's like. You're going in because you want to just get scared, have an experience, whatever, and you know it's not going to hurt you because it's a ghost and it can't hurt you, right? Just like a roller coaster, technically isn't, you're not going to die because there's straps and whatever in place,
Sure.
versus like, yeah, I would never swim in the middle of the ocean. Like, I just wouldn't go there because sharks scare me, fish scare me, water scares me like to that depth. Like, so I just wouldn't go. Right. But it's like, I'll go to something where I think I'm going to get scared because, it's adrenaline hunting, I guess. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, and again, there's nothing wrong with this. I mean, it's the same thing
Hmm.
with, like, for example, horror films or even BDSM,
Yeah.
right? Where
Same as horror
somebody,
films. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah,
somebody
exactly.
you're consensually putting yourself in a scary-ish situation,
Hmm.
but
But there's
that
like safety in place. Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So there's that.
I am gonna do a video and explore this a bit more about the primal brain too, because I think we see shadows in the corner of our eyes, or we feel like at night or in the dark, we feel like things are happening or whatever. And I think it's our primal sense of like it's just on high alert because it goes back to our caveman days, where we were like in danger of being eaten by things. And I think that kind of kicks in still a little bit, just like the anxiety attacks, like the fight or flight or freeze and anxiety, because I suffer from anxiety, and like my therapist, I've gone to a bunch of them, therapists would tell me it's my primal brain, and for whatever reason it now thinks that I was scared of doctors because I went through a thing, It now thinks doctors are saber-toothed tigers. And every time I'm around a doctor, I have a complete meltdown. Right? And it's because my primal brain is kicking in, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do like CBT therapy to like tell my brain, no, doctors are not going to hurt you. Stop freaking out,
Right.
you know? Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, and what you find, I think, cycling back a second to the fear situation, is that typically people fear the fears of the unknown, right? So,
Yeah. It's the
once
unknown.
you once you've identified what it is, people don't tend to fear it. It's if if in the example that you gave, right, something stirring in the darkness, why be afraid of it, right? If you look, if you are in a warehouse, if you're in a giant warehouse and you set up a tent inside that warehouse and all the doors are locked, there are 15 cats. So there's a giant metal warehouse, the doors are locked, there's 15 cats, and you're a tent inside that warehouse, and the lights go off and you're inside your tent. And you hear something outside of your tent, I'm not going to be scared because I know it's a cat.
Right.
I don't know which cat, but it's a cat because the parameters are set. So it's a case of where the source of the fear is the unknown. And things that are unpredictable. I wrote a book called Bad Clowns, where I looked at evil clowns throughout the ages. And one of the reasons why people find clowns scary is they're unpredictable, particularly outside of a particular context, right? So if it's in a film or if it's in a circus, that's one thing. You can predict what they're going to do. They're going to do pratfalls. They'll make comedy. They'll throw pies and then they'll go on. But if you see a clown outside of that context, if you see a clown, walking a park at night or knocking on your door at 2 a.m, that's unpredictable. And so that's what makes them scary.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like also the other end, not scary, but like you're in high school and you see your teacher at the grocery store and it just feels so weird. It's like that
What
weird
are you doing
uncanny
here?
valley feeling. Yeah.
You
like,
eat?
oh my gosh.
What is wrong with you? Go back in the classroom.
Exactly. All right. Now my viewers had a list of questions. I hope we can get through them, but I know I don't want to like take up too much of your time, but I love discussing this stuff. So my viewers had questions on, well, power suggestion. I think we kind of talked about that, with the telling the person that this coworker sucks or whatever. Right. The other one's Pareidolia.
No, let me circle back to that. I mean, the power suggesting. So the coworker suck. That's more anchoring bias and confirmation bias. The power of suggestion, I would say, would be. I mean, that's also a suggestion, but it's also for example, the labeling of experiences, right? So, for example, if you are if you're in a haunted location, if you're a ghost hunter or an amateur ghost hunter, and you go to a place that is said to be haunted, then the power of suggestion will tend to create ghosts. In that, if you hear anything weird, a sound, a smell, whatever else, then it's a ghost. But here's the important thing: if you were at home or at a friend's house and you heard that exact same sound or that same smell, you wouldn't think it's a ghost. It's like, it's a cat, it's this or that. But the framework, the conceptual framework and the anchoring would lead. And the same thing with Bigfoot, right? I've written about Bigfoot. So if you're in the woods and you've heard Sasquatch stories or Bigfoot stories, and you see something at night or making a loud roar or in the distance, the power of suggestion may lead you to think that it is something unknown as opposed to just a moose or an elk or something else.
I guess it's even like so I'm in the YouTube world and I know not all of you are familiar with it, but there's a huge community of people that are into the paranormal stuff and believe all these fake like ghost hunters, right? But
Sure.
like that's part of it. They look at the thumbnail and the thumbnail says there was a demon here. The title talks about being attacked by a demon. And so then they watch the video and then their like phone app says the word demon during the video, right? And it's just a phone app. It's not it's not a real tool. And then so then the viewer thinks it's a demon, right? And it's just like, yeah, it starts with the thumbnail and the title and kind of goes from there, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and that actually brings up another point, which is that, and I talk about this in my I wrote a book called Scientific Paranormal Investigation, and in that book I talk about how oftentimes a lot of the words that we use to describe things, such as ghost or UFO or Bigfoot or things like a psychic, they're not, they're labels for experiences. In other words, we don't know for sure what ghosts are. There's lots, as you know, there's lots of different theories. Some people think they're residual energies. Some people think they're interdimensional things. Some people they're the spirits of the dead. Any number of things. So again, there is no universal consensus on what ghosts are. Period. Flat out.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Yeah.
Same thing with Bigfoot. This and that. And so it's important to recognize from an investigative point of view that if someone says they saw a ghost, that could mean anything. And if you talk to people who've experienced ghostly phenomena, as I have for many years, some people, you say, people say to me, I saw a ghost. Like, okay, I don't know if you did or didn't. That doesn't tell me anything. I don't know what that means. Tell me, what specifically did you see? What specifically did you hear? What was your experience? And then whether or not that experience warrants the label of ghost is another matter altogether. But in the case of ghosts, for example, some people interpret ghosts as being again a sound or an odd feeling. Some people it's apparitions, in a number of things. So just saying that you saw Bigfoot doesn't tell me anything. I don't know what that means. Tell me what you saw, and keep in mind that what you saw may have other explanations. Maybe it was a Bigfoot, maybe it was a ghost, but maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It depends on the context. It depends what else is going on. So that's another important key here, is recognizing that these labels that people throw around as if they mean something, they're simple, easily affixed descriptions for an experience and that experience could be very complex, could be very nuanced. And in order to understand what that thing is, whether that experience truly was a ghost, whether that experience truly was a Bigfoot or experience with psychic whatever else, you need to dig into each one of those. But just throwing these labels around, it's not useful investigatively.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're making me also think that what I envision Bigfoot is might be different from what someone else thinks it is. And if I don't ask the questions of what you really saw, then I'm just going to assume you saw what I think that's interesting. That's an interesting path, actually. Yeah. The next question, just people were wondering a bit more about like pareidolia from the psychology aspect of it.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, pareidolia plays an important role in a lot of investigations. In miracles, ghost photos is of course very common. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times when someone has sent me a ghost photo or what they claimed was a ghost photo. And they say, yeah, Mr. Radford, I saw you on TV. I know you've researched this, will you look at my ghost photo? I'm like, sure. They sent it to me and like, I was at the Waverly Sanitarium. I was at some haunted location and we took a bunch of photos and, these three, there's something weird in there. And so they zoom in on, on something, and they'll say, this kind of looks like a face, or this looks like the top part of a body. And it's ambiguous. It's this sort of blur. And I'll say, well, and I'll look at it, but I'm like, there's two dots and a third dot, like, and that doesn't mean it's a ghost. And so I'll tell people like, well, can you send me the original photo? So they always want to send me these super cropped and enhanced things, which does me no good. Say, send me the original, send me the whatever you got on your phone. And typically it is, of course, it's much, it's, maybe, 2 megabytes. And they've zoomed in and tortured this thing out of it until, and I'm like, and so again, this is very common, right? This is why people see faces in clouds. They see faces in coffee stains. It is a normal process. In fact, one of the first things that babies recognize, not surprisingly, are faces. Humans are psychologically primed to find faces, and we will find faces whether they're or not. This is why, again, on the next nice sunny day, look up at the clouds. You will see shapes, you'll see dragons, you'll see faces, you'll see any number of things. Doesn't mean they're there. It just means that's pareidolia in action.
Why do you think that is? Like, why does psychology say why we do that? Like, why are we always looking for faces?
Well, because of course, in the case of babies, of course, because that's our caregivers. So it's important for babies to recognize when another human is looking down at us, going to give us food or change our diapers, whatever else. So, and of course, keep in mind that the faces are how we communicate. Right now I'm talking to you, I'm looking at your face.
Yeah.
Face. We get so much information from not just words, expressions, tone, body language, but especially in the face and expressions. A friend of mine who I do the podcast with, Squaring the Strange, she's a caricature artist, and she spends her days drawing faces, and she has really interesting insights into little fine nuances about why we see what distinguishes faces from each other, and why we're drawn to faces. So that's a big part of it. There's so much information that's conveyed in faces. It makes perfect sense that we're going to be focusing on them instead of elbows or feet or ears or breasts or anything else.
Okay, it's like, yeah, we're kind of processing a lot through a face. That's true. That's true. Yeah, because even like people like watching videos where like the person's on video talking more than like just a voiceover most of the time. Or at
Yeah,
least if you're going to do voiceover, then play some footage with people in it, pictures of people
exactly.
or footage of people. Because yeah, we tend to like that. So it tends to go over well with media. So next question is, why are people drawn to the supernatural slash paranormal? Is it because they're open minded? Is it brain chemistry? Is it nature versus nurture? Is there anything like that?
Yeah, there's lots of reasons. One of the classic explanations is what's called magical thinking. And this has been written about pretty extensively. The late Paul Kurtz, who founded the organization I work for now, who's a philosopher at University of Buffalo, he wrote about this, and it's also called the transcendental temptation. And it's
Okay.
this notion that, yeah, you've heard it. I mean, it's this notion that that we're not alone, that there is something bigger than us. It could be God, it could
Right.
be demons, it could be spirits, it could be Zeus, it could be, take your pick. But there's something ephemeral and that is in control, or at least influencing our daily lives. So, for example, it's very easy to do. So, for example, if you're in a near miss car accident, it's easy to think that maybe angels were looking over you, like, oh my god, like I was in this car accident. If I had turned a split second earlier, I would have been spun around 3 times and knocked in a
Right.
river. But
Mhm.
fortunately, just by the grace of God, or timing, or random, whatever it is. So people like to attribute something. They like to think something else is at play, and we see this, for example, often in superstitions, where, for example, people will talk about luck, right? The idea of luck, this idea that if you say the right things, if you have a rabbit's foot, if you have a lucky penny, if you pray to the right god, if you avoid black cats, if you do any number of things, that God or the universe or karma, whatever label you want to fix to it,
Yeah,
will
people believe in
reward you.
karma a lot. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so there's this notion, and it also gets into what's called the just world hypothesis, which is a whole other
Mhm.
topic. But basically, the idea that some people believe that the world is fundamentally just. That is, um, good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and it all sort of evens out in the end.
Like a
Um,
yin and yang kind of thing.
yeah,
Like there's like
yeah,
equality on the good and evil, and they
yeah,
have to
and
both exist or neither one of them does, kind of thing. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and so, to some extent, I mean, it sort of gets into what's called the law of attraction. There was The Secret, which I'm sure you've heard about many
Yeah.
years ago. But there's a darker side to the just world hypothesis, which is that and also karma, for example.
Mhm.
I mean, karma in America, in the Western world, people tend to sort of misuse the word karma, or they don't really understand what it means. In its original sense, it's not that everything evens out. It's that that the things you do will come back to you in later life, and vice versa, good and bad.
Yeah, it's like your next life. That's usually when it catches up with you. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
and it could be, and you could come back as a different animal, it could be something else, but there's a
Yeah, you
darker
can
side
be
to it.
lower on the food chain. I think that's like Buddhist, is it?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. But
That's really interesting. Yeah.
the other facet to it is that it also means that that you get what you deserve.
Mhm.
So if you are assaulted, if you are killed, you deserved it, because what
Yeah.
that means, I'm just telling you, this is
That's
what
yeah.
karma.
No,
Yeah,
if you go back in time, yeah, that's what people
yeah,
would say, like in the
yeah.
medieval
This is,
times,
so the
and a
idea
lot
is
of this
that,
stuff starts from back then. Like it
yeah,
starts with
is that
religion.
you
Yeah.
must have you must have done something in a previous life, or maybe in this life, I don't
Mhm.
know, but if something really horrible happened to you, um
Mhm.
it's your own fault. And I don't believe that. I mean, that's sort of a dark area, because again, you could
Yeah.
apply that to Holocaust survivors. You could apply that to any sort of victim.
Yeah.
Um, and anyway, so not only get off track, but that's one of the
Yeah.
facets to it.
Yeah, like, and I think part of it too is like, I think it goes way back, right? Because life is short. And I think like it's something that people are trying to like figure out, why is my life harder than this person's, or why did my child die at such a young age? Like the history of Lilith. I do talk about her in one of my videos. I should cover her again. She's very interesting because she showed up as a demon before the Bible because it was an explanation why kids and wives died in childbirth. They blamed Lilith, and there was a male version of her as well. And so they created these demons, and this was before the Bible, because that would explain all the bad things. So if something bad happened to you, this demon
Right.
attached themselves to you, right? And it's like we, for some reason, as humans, try to like figure out, blame some unknown reason or believe in something to assuage our fears. Am I using, is that the right word? That
Yeah.
might be the wrong word. you know,
No, that
yeah,
is the right word.
yeah.
And again, you see this. I mean, it happened in the witchcraft trials. It happened, in one of my books. I wrote a book on the chupacabra, and in
Mm-hmm.
that book, I talk about the history of vampires, particularly in Eastern Europe.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah, that's where I talked about my Lilith. I did a history of vampire
yeah,
video.
yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
it's
and again,
interesting.
people
Yeah.
would, and again, this happens all the time. Where people, there will be something bad will happen to somebody. So, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of magical thinking, which I talked about before, part of the idea is I feel like a good person. Something bad happened to me. Why? Why did this
Yeah.
happen to me? I didn't deserve this. This is horrible. This is terrible. Someone did this to me. And this is where you get ideas about curses, about
Mm-hmm.
witchcraft, about vampires, about divine vengeance, the plague being sent, locusts and things like that. Is people assume people? It's easy to sort of think, when you talk about magical thinking, that something bad happened to me. I didn't deserve this. Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
someone is out to get me. Someone's out to hurt me. And as you mentioned, I mean, you talk about Lilith and vampires, and that's all part of that. And I'll just add that this happens to this day.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the many projects I'm working on is with I have several friends in Africa, in Nigeria and Malawi specifically, and
Mm-hmm.
we work together on trying to stamp out witchcraft accusations.
Oh, is
Because
it still like a problem?
it is, yeah,
Really?
it is happening. It
Oh.
happened last week. This is happening.
Oh
This is one of the things
wow.
that people forget, is a lot of times when people talk about, they think about witchcraft, they think about either the pagan stuff, or they think of like the sort of the cartoony witches, Disney and Halloween. But in fact, to this day, in Brazil, in South America, in India, and throughout sub-Saharan Africa, people, usually women, not always, but often women, are accused of being witches. And sometimes they have been attacked, and in some cases burned alive and beaten.
Oh, wow. That's
And
horrible.
it is,
God.
it's just frustrating to me to sort of see how limited this notion of witchcraft is in the Western world. Whereas if you sort of
Mm.
break out of your blinders, and you sort of see the consequences of these witchcraft beliefs, particularly in Africa, they're really severe, and it's important not forget them.
Sort of side tangent. In Africa, is it because like is it Bible related? Like is it Catholics or whatever? Because like Africa didn't start that way, right? The apartheid pushed a religion on them or something, right?
Well,
Back in the
well, I
day?
mean, apartheid was specifically South Africa, but yeah, I mean, so you
Oh,
have the
okay.
post-colonial, you know, of course, the British in Kenya, you have the Portuguese in Mozambique and elsewhere, the Germans in Namibia, Belgian Congo, and so on. So it's actually kind of interesting. So there's an aspect to it in which is the witchcraft accusations are part of the post-colonial world. In some
Mhm.
cases, the colonialism actually helped because in some cases, for example, I think in Nigeria, off the top of my head, under colonial rule, witchcraft accusations were outlawed. In other words,
Oh, okay.
you could be you could get in trouble for accusing somebody of being a witch because
Yeah.
the British colonizers didn't believe in witchcraft. I mean, they you could argue they believe in their own version of witchcraft in Christianity, but they didn't believe in
Mhm.
this sort of, this dark continent witchcraft. The problem, so there's this sort of wrinkle here where as much as many Africans want to debunk and throw off and refute the colonial legacy, and justifiably so, in a few cases that colonial legacy helped diminish
Mhm.
and stamp out witchcraft accusations, which are demonstrably harmful to many people. So there's a sort of
Yeah.
dynamic aspect to it.
It's like when I did the history of vampires, there was one king or queen or someone, Austria? I can't remember exactly. And they ended up making like vampirism accusations illegal because people were digging up bodies and doing
Mhm.
dumb crap. And they were like, okay, that's enough. You guys are freaking out. So they made it
This is
illegal just to get control of their people again because everyone was starting to lose it, right? So, but
mhm.
like Africans, don't they have don't they have like shamanistic kind of like old before the Bible, right? Don't they have like some kind
Sure.
of
Oh
pagan
yeah,
stuff? Is that what they think is
absolutely.
witchcraft? Is people that are like practicing
Yeah,
medicine men and medicine
yeah. I
women
mean,
and
yeah, I've written pretty extensively on this. So and again, this goes back to the sort of the inherent human reaching for desire to reach for magical ideas and magical thinking,
Mhm.
and the transcendental temptation, where, and this is particularly true again in Africa, where if somebody, if something bad happens to somebody, so they have a stroke, or the lightning hits their hut, or the house burned down, or there's a drought, any number of things. Oftentimes they will assume it is the result of black magic. They will assume that there's a witch nearby, that someone has cursed them.
Okay. So they're kind of
um,
like it's like Salem kind of like old witchcraft days in England and
yeah,
stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so what happens is that oftentimes they will, well, here's the problem, right? Is that if you believe that if you're, let's say you're in Malawi or Mozambique or somewhere, or anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa, and something bad happens to you, and you think that it's because of witchcraft, you think that someone has put a curse on you. So, well, who did it? It could be your neighbor, it could be an in-law, it could be a rival, it could be anybody else. So what they will sometimes do, I mean, and oftentimes, of course, we all have enemies. We all have people who we don't get along with. We had a
Mhm.
breakup. Every human alive, has
Yeah.
people that they don't like, some more than others. And so oftentimes people will falsely and wrongly accuse some innocent person
That
of having cursed
person.
them.
Mhm.
Other times they will go to a witch doctor, and they'll say, this bad thing happened to me. Tell me who has cursed me. And this gets
Mhm.
very dangerous, right? Because the witch doctor, they may or may not be from the village. They may or may not know. the witch doctor may actually say, well, who are you having a beef with? Like, give me names. Like, tell me who might have done this to you. And again, the person could probably come up with 3 or 4 more people, dozen, who knows. And the witch doctor might say, oh, you know what? This one, you just told me these 5 people. This is the one that did this to you. But fortunately, I can fix this. If you bring me more money, it's a very powerful magic, but I can undo it. And then not only is the witch doctor getting money off of that, but that's also engendering false accusations against this other person who had nothing to do with the drought or a fire starting, but who's now being accused of that.
Yeah, it's like the fake psychics that tell someone they're cursed so that they have to remove a curse or something. Like, there's someone in my city who was doing that when I was younger, so that I knew personally.
Wow.
So yeah. I've met, well, my mom was a professional psychic, so I grew up on the circuit, so I've seen a lot of crappy people. All right. Next question. Okay, I guess this goes in kind of what we were talking about. How does a well-written or well-presented story change your mindset so easily? I could think of like, oh gosh, do you remember when documentaries were first coming out and there was like the moon landing, and then someone made a whole documentary like explaining why it's fake, and like people believed it because it was just so well done, like as a film, and people didn't like, people were like, oh my gosh, it's fake, like that. Now people like totally believe the moon landing is fake because of that documentary. So what would be the psych explanation for this?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one is that a lot of conspiracies emerge about subjects that people can't fact check firsthand. So, for example, I mean, the moon landing is a perfect example, right? So, if somebody spreads a rumor about something that is down the street or some person in your town, you can probably check that depending on what it is, right? You can go there yourself. In the case of the moon landing, unless you are one of a handful of billionaires or NASA, you can't go to the moon to check for yourself. You have to take other people's word for it. And that sort of, that separation, it's there's nothing nefarious about it. It's just, I can't go to the moon to check. Neither can you. I don't have that money or interest anywhere else. So, excuse me. So we have to go through what other people tell us. And if people are sort of raising doubts and conspiracies about that source, right? What's NASA covering up? Probably nothing. But if that's your premise, then it's easy to sort of say, yeah, what is NASA covering up? What they don't want us to know. So that's part of the facet here. And again, with the moon landing was, it's just so silly. I mean, it's just like, it would be like the people, they'll pick and choose like the reasons why they think the moon landing was hoax. They will point to things like, why is the flag standing up in zero space?
Yeah. Well, all the stuff they pick is from that have you watched that documentary?
Yeah. It's just ridiculous.
It's very convincing, right? So it's like it's all from that documentary. And I just find it's like, we grew up our whole lives, the moon landing was real, and just that one documentary has changed so many people's minds. Like, what? Why?
Yeah, and you see the same things, like, for example, the 9/11 attacks, right? And so, and
there was a documentary on that too. I remember.
Oh yeah. There's all sorts of different ones, and I mean, and some of them are just so obviously wrong-headed. I mean, one of the I mean, I don't want, that's a whole different tangent, but I remember one of them was this notion about how people say, well, that jet fuel can't melt steel, and that's true. So that is, so they're like the Twin Towers couldn't have come down only on jet fuel burning, because the steel, they're made of strengthened steel, right? And if you look
I see like the 9/11, people were willing to think that it was fake so easily because they didn't want to believe that a country would hate them. Like Americans, it's a thing with Americans, are kind of like, love America. And they don't realize like how many people on the eastern side of the world don't like America. And it's like, it's a coping mechanism. I saw it as like a coping mechanism.
Well,
Someone would hate you guys enough to actually hurt you because
well,
like your country is so
but,
good. Like, yeah.
But except that the problem with that theory is that many of the people that believe in 9/11 theories, they say that Bush did it. So
it's like,
so in other words,
I don't know.
Well, right, but
why?
but
Yeah, it's like, well,
but here's
that's what
the thing, where it's like,
right?
you know, it's like if the claim is that 9/11 was a cover up, then the Bush administration would be, by definition, that's what a cover up is. Like, that's, so the idea is, so it was sort of like, which is it? Is it, you're saying that 9/11, so the US government was in on it, or they weren't in on it? Like, which of these?
I think there's some people that just like hate the government so much too, and those are the same people that believe that the JFK thing is
right,
up too,
yeah,
right?
But
yeah.
But in this case, like, the people they're claiming hate the government are the government. That was the government at the time.
Yeah.
You know, and so anyway, just to circle back to just to finish up on the jet fuel can't melt steel. So what they're missing. So here's the thing. So there is a grain of truth to that. It is true that jet fuel at the temperatures that we saw there can't melt steel. Here's the thing: steel doesn't have to be melted. You don't need to melt it into liquid. It just has to be weakened enough that the weight will collapse on itself, which is exactly what happened. So again, this is basic physics. Any physicist could have told them this. So like, oh well, if you take a steel bar, it won't turn to liquid. It doesn't have to turn to liquid. It has to be soft enough that the hundreds of tons of weight above it will collapse. And there's no mystery here. And so that's one of the frustrating things about that conspiracy. Well, it's this blatant mystery mongering
there was another documentary made to follow, because when I first seen the documentary, I was like, oh, maybe, because I'm like, I know like what was it, the Watergate and like other things. So I'm like, maybe the government did something. I don't know. Maybe they did start war. I'm like, from Canada, I'm like, I don't know. I could believe that. And then I seen the follow-up documentary where they actually explained that about steel. They were like, yeah, but it burned for an extended period and it was just weakened, and there was other materials that burned around it, which kept the fire going. Like, I was like, oh, okay. Like, because at first I believed it, because also we were in shock, right? Because we're just like, really? Like, this, are we going to be hurt in a plane? Like, if we travel? Like, I think that's part of it too. It was like a coping mechanism to just blame the government. But then, when that follow-up documentary came out, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because I remember Googling the steel thing when I first seen the documentary. I was like, it is true that steel doesn't, but it's like, no, there's other factors, right? And it's like, oh, okay. And then when someone explained it, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Yeah. The last question is, why is it that people who see ghosts and stuff, why do they always see them dressed in like period wear? Like, you know what? They don't see modern dressed people, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the appearance of ghosts has always been sort of one of the curiosities of ghost investigation, right? And so, I mean, for that matter, why do people see ghosts clothed, right? I mean, if the belief is that, again, it depends. As I talk about in my book, Investigating Ghosts, there's no consensus on what ghosts are. I mean, I list, I think, a half dozen theories, all by experts who've written books and they do shows about it. And in some cases, they're contradictory. So again, it depends on what you're saying ghosts are. So if you believe that ghosts are the spirits of the dead, that's fine. I mean, that's one explanation. But presumably clothing doesn't have a soul, because it's cotton and polyester and whatever else. But the fact is, of course, that when you look at it from a folkloric point of view, it makes sense, because there are not only ghosts of people in period costume, there are ghosts of ships. There's a Flying Dutchman. There are ghosts of stagecoaches, horses, animals which, according to Catholic tradition, don't have souls. And so therefore, logically, if you're going to connect those, shouldn't appear as ghosts at all. which is of course ironic given that ghosts are mentioned several times in the Bible.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's part of the answer is that the reason why people see ghosts in period costume is because that's what they expect to see. It goes back to confirmation bias. It goes back to framing. It goes back to being told what to look for in a given situation. If you're told to look for uh, a uh, a young girl in a long dress that is seen at midnight in a particular hallway, then that's probably something along the lines of what you'll see. If you're told
Right.
instead to look for, you know, an old woman on a widow's walk, then you know, in a fancy hat, maybe she used to be a prostitute. Again, a lot of these ghost stories they come pre-packaged, and I talk about that in my investigating ghost book. Is there's a lot of in most of these ghost cases there's a pre-existing narrative that people who go there they're well aware of. They've read up on it. That's why they're there. They are there
Yeah.
because this is a famous, you know, location of hauntings, and they know the story. They know that
Hmm.
allegedly this person died there, and there was this, you know, lovers feud, and someone died, and it was horrible, and so they know all the characters. And so
Hmm.
in that context, if you go there looking for ghosts, if you go there knowing full well either the entire story or part of the story, you'll probably be told by a psychic or somebody else who's already there, or the ghost hunters. So no one goes into this cold. They all go into
Hmm.
this with pre-existing information, which of course then influences what they experience, and in many cases, what they claim to see.
Yeah, it's like because I would go in when I was younger. Remember, I said I like grew up thinking I was psychic, so I would go on ghost things and I would do seances as a medium. But I would go in like I already like I'd know the history ahead of time, right?
Yeah,
I actually enjoy history, so I would often also hire like a historian to do intro for the group for fun of like the history. So I'd know the history. It was like, and then I'd pick up on stuff. I'm like, am I? Now it's like looking back, I'm like, well, I kind of already knew the story, didn't I? So it's
right.
like it's funny, like just having blinders on for so many years, right? So
Definitely.
but yeah, I'll let you get going. Now if you want to send me like some links to things of yours that I can like plug and put below, like you have a ton of books and stuff like that.
Sure, sure.
If you have like an author page on Amazon or whatever, send me a link to it. Anything else that you're working on?
This year is actually the 30th anniversary of the Chupacabra. For those who don't know,
Oh,
so I have a
okay.
follow up on 30 years of the Chupacabra coming out soon, and I have a
Okay.
column in every issue, and so yeah, I'm around and about.
Okay, because I can also bring up your author profile link for Skeptical Inquirer as well.
Cool.
But yeah, it sounds like you've written a lot of books, so I'd like to put the link for that too. So, all right, well, thank you for coming to talk. I love this psychology stuff. My viewers really like the psychology stuff too that I throw into the videos, so it's fun
Oh,
to have
good.
someone who actually has a degree in it to come and talk to us. So.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a fun conversation, and we could do it again sometime.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I appreciate your time. As we've seen today, psychology offers a compelling lens through which to examine paranormal experiences. From the quirks of perception and memory to the weight of cultural narratives and social influences, our brains are constantly at work constructing the reality we live in, even if that reality sometimes appears to defy explanation. And just a quick recap of some of the key points from today. Perception is our brain's use of shortcuts that can misinterpret ambiguous stimuli as paranormal events. Memory and emotion, our recollections and emotional states can reshape our experiences, sometimes even intensify them into something supernatural. And cultural and social influences, our environment and collective beliefs heavily influence how we perceive and interpret unusual events. And as for specific phenomena, like the sleep paralysis and things we discussed, most of them have some explanations behind them, but each experience that people have is unique to themselves. And if you're searching for a psychological explanation for it, you're probably going to find it. I know we didn't cover all phenomena in this video because, there's just too much to cover. But if there's something you'd like to see covered, leave a comment below and let me know. But you know, whether you're a believer or skeptic or somewhere in the middle, hopefully today's exploration has given you some new insights into the interplay of our minds and the paranormal. Our brains are not just passive recorders of reality. Our brains actively construct our experiences, often blurring the line between the known and the unknown. But in general, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Have you had an experience that you couldn't quite explain? What psychological basis do you think might be behind it? Let me know in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this little bit of a deep dive into the science of the supernatural, please hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe for more on paranormal, critical thinking, and sometimes just a bit of fun theory crafting that we do too. Remember, sometimes the most interesting mysteries aren't out there, but they're right here inside our own minds. Also, thank you to all the members and supporters. Your support means the world to me. It really does help out with the channel quite a lot. And for those of you who want to watch my videos a day early, ad-free, that is what you get with the membership, along with some emotes and other things like that. You can check it out below. But I'm going to sign off here. All of you stay curious and stay open-minded, and I'll see you in the next video. Have a good night.